Why do intelligent people often seem indifferent to others? What makes smart individuals appear cold and distant in social situations? Is their detachment a sign of arrogance or actually a natural consequence of their intellectual development? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most pessimistic yet insightful philosophers of the 19th century, had an answer to these questions, and it wasn't particularly flattering to most people. To him, the world was populated by shallow minds focused on trivial matters, engaged in empty conversations and obsessed with meaningless social rituals. Intelligence, by its very nature, required distance from this mediocre spectacle. As he famously wrote, the more intelligent a person is, the less they need the company of others. But was Schopenhauer right, or is this apparent lack of interest in others merely a convenient excuse for poor social skills? Think about figures like Albert Einstein, who often seemed lost in his own world, or Marie Curie, who preferred her laboratory to social gatherings, or even modern tech geniuses who appear awkward in public interactions. Were they examples of minds too advanced to bother with ordinary social connections, or simply individuals who never learned to connect properly with others? Today we'll dive into Schopenhauer's ideas to understand why smart people seem to care less about you and whether this indifference is truly a sign of intellectual superiority or just a sophisticated form of social failure. Imagine a brilliant person sitting alone at a party, watching others engage in small talk while their mind wanders to complex questions about existence. While everyone else eagerly discusses the latest celebrity gossip, they're silently contemplating the nature of consciousness. While others laugh at simple jokes, they're analyzing patterns of human behavior with detached curiosity. And inevitably they find themselves feeling like an outsider. Arthur Schopenhauer believed this disconnect wasn't a choice but an unavoidable result of having a sharper mind. According to him, the smarter a person is, the harder it becomes to find people capable of engaging with their thoughts and understanding their perspective. Ordinary people think merely of spending time, superior people think of using it, he wrote, highlighting the fundamental difference in how intelligent people value their existence. In his view, intelligence creates a natural barrier between a person and everyone else because what interests the majority seems painfully shallow to someone who sees the world with greater depth and complexity. When a smart person looks at typical social interaction, they often see nothing but a waste of their limited time on Earth. Time that could be spent on learning, creating, or exploring ideas. Schopenhauer wasn't alone in this observation. Consider Isaac Newton, who often forgot to eat because he was so absorbed in his work, or Nikola Tesla, who found human contact distracting and preferred the company of pigeons later in life. Even today, many highly intelligent people report feeling exhausted by having to dumb down their thoughts or pretend interest in topics they find meaningless just to fit in. But this detachment comes with a price. The need to distance oneself from ordinary social interaction can lead to profound loneliness. Schopenhauer recognized this painful trade-off and considered it inevitable. While intellectual isolation could be liberating for great thinkers, allowing their minds to soar beyond conventional boundaries, it also meant carrying a heavy emotional burden. This is why many brilliant people throughout history experienced periods of depression and anxiety, not because they were mentally weak, but because they saw reality in a way that most could never understand. So, is this apparent lack of interest in others a blessing or a curse for the intelligent person? For Schopenhauer, the answer was crystal clear. This detachment from others wasn't something to be fixed but rather embraced as a necessary condition for intellectual freedom. He saw disinterest in others not as a character flaw but as a sign of mental independence. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, he declared, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. Schopenhauer didn't view social life as a place for genuine connection or authentic exchange. Instead, he saw it as an elaborate theater where people wore masks, hiding their true selves behind carefully constructed personas. He believed most social interactions were performances driven by vanity, insecurity, and the desperate need for validation. This perspective connected directly to his famous work, The World as Will and Representation, where he argued that everything we perceive is essentially a projection created by our minds. To him, social life was just another illusion, a distraction that kept people from understanding deeper truths about themselves and reality. Schopenhauer was convinced that most people were trapped in trivial concerns, status anxiety, mindless gossip, power struggles, and the endless pursuit of others' approval. In his view, the average person was a slave to what he called the will, a blind, irrational force that drives us to constantly seek satisfaction that never truly comes. The desperate search for social connection was just another expression of this restless will. And here lies the fundamental problem. While most people happily participate in this shallow game, those with sharper intellects see through them. Social interaction often feels like watching a predictable play where everyone recites lines they've heard before, laughs at jokes that aren't funny, and pretends to care about things that don't matter. This awareness creates a nearly impossible gap between smart people and everyone else. Other philosophers noted similar patterns. Friedrich Nietzsche, heavily influenced by Schopenhauer, observed that in individuals insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. This highlighted how group behavior often seems irrational to the independent thinker. The unavoidable result? Intelligent people find themselves mentally isolated even when physically surrounded by others. But this creates a painful side effect. Prolonged detachment can lead to growing contempt for ordinary people. Schopenhauer recognized this danger and cautioned that for those who see beyond social illusions, the challenge becomes learning to exist in a world that feels fundamentally alien without becoming bitter. But how exactly does this mental distance show up in daily life? Why do smart people often seem so uninterested in what you have to say? Schopenhauer didn't mince words when describing ordinary social interactions. To him, most conversations were driven by superficial concerns, empty status displays, and intellectual laziness. This created an unavoidable gap between truly intelligent people and everyone else, a gap he believed couldn't and shouldn't be bridged. Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see, he famously observed. This intellectual isolation happens because smart people naturally seek depth in their interactions. While most people are happy discussing the weather, celebrity gossip, or repeating opinions they heard elsewhere, the intelligent person craves meaningful exchange about ideas, concepts, and the bigger questions of existence. When they attempt to introduce these topics, they're often met with blank stares, uncomfortable silence, or quick changes of subject. This explains why many brilliant people seem uninterested in talking to you. They've learned through painful experience that attempting real conversation often leads nowhere. Consider Albert Einstein, who despite his fame, preferred solitude and often appeared distant in social settings. Or consider how many highly intelligent children get labeled as antisocial, simply because they find their peers' interests bewilderingly simple. The problem isn't just about communication difficulties but about fundamentally different mental worlds. The intelligent person seeks understanding and insight while the average person seeks comfort and validation. This conflict creates a situation where smart people often feel like aliens observing a strange species when interacting with others. They can mimic the behaviors required to fit in, but inside they feel disconnected from what everyone else finds important. This mental distance isn't created solely by the intelligent person's choice. Often society actively pushes away those who think differently. People who challenge conventional wisdom or ask uncomfortable questions frequently face social rejection. As Schopenhauer noted, the discovery of truth is prevented more effectively not by the false appearance things present and which mislead into error, not directly by weakness of the reasoning powers, but by preconceived opinion, by prejudice. Thus, the smart person isn't only withdrawing by choice but is also being subtly excluded by a society that feels threatened by independent thinking. This mutual rejection creates a feedback loop that reinforces the intelligent person's disinterest in others. But if social connection seems so difficult for smart people, how should they navigate a world that feels fundamentally misaligned with their mental needs? Schopenhauer believed that for the intelligent person, emotional and intellectual independence was not just a choice but a necessity. A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, he wrote, suggesting that true intellectual freedom required a certain distance from society's conformist pressures. For him, the solution wasn't trying harder to fit in or pretending interest in things that felt meaningless, but rather embracing solitude as a space for authentic thought and personal growth. The intelligent person's apparent lack of interest in others isn't necessarily arrogance but often self-preservation, a way to protect their mental energy and inner world from being drained by interactions that give nothing back. This perspective doesn't mean complete isolation is the answer. Even Schopenhauer recognized that humans have social needs. The key is being selective about who gets access to your mental space. As he put it, it is better to be alone than in bad company. Intelligent people often develop a small circle of similarly minded individuals with whom they can be their authentic selves. These rare connections become infinitely more valuable than hundreds of shallow acquaintances. Many brilliant historical figures followed this pattern. Leonardo da Vinci was known for being private and selective about his companions. Marie Curie focused intensely on her work and a few meaningful relationships rather than broad social connections. This approach mirrors certain Eastern philosophical traditions that Schopenhauer admired, particularly Buddhism, which teaches that attachment to external validation leads to suffering while inner contemplation leads to freedom. The challenge for intelligent people is balancing their need for mental independence with basic human connection. No matter how brilliant someone is, complete isolation can lead to its own form of suffering. Even great thinkers sometimes experience profound loneliness. Schopenhauer himself wasn't immune to this pain, but he believed it was a necessary trade-off for intellectual clarity. His solution involved cultivating philosophical detachment, learning to observe social dynamics without becoming emotionally entangled in them. This allowed for limited engagement without sacrificing one's inner freedom. But in practical terms, how can intelligent people navigate relationships with others without feeling constantly frustrated by the perceived shallowness they encounter? Schopenhauer offered a practical approach for smart people struggling to relate to others without compromising their intellectual integrity. His strategy wasn't about faking interest or dumbing down ideas but developing what he called intellectual distance, a way of engaging with people without becoming emotionally invested in their approval. Politeness is to human nature what warmth is to wax, he wrote, suggesting that basic courtesy could smooth social interactions without requiring deep personal investment. For him, the secret wasn't trying to change others or yourself but developing a mindset of calm observation. Rather than feeling frustrated by others' limited perspectives, the intelligent person can view human behavior with the same detached curiosity a scientist might have when studying an interesting phenomenon. This means accepting that most conversations will remain at a surface level without feeling personally irritated by it, understanding that most people have different intellectual priorities without judging them harshly, and maintaining mental independence without needing constant external validation. This approach is similar to what Stoic philosophers recommended, focusing on what you can control, your reactions, rather than what you can't, others' intellectual interests. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, advised, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." The world will always be filled with small talk and discussions that intelligent people find tiresome, but each person can choose how much emotional energy to invest in these interactions. Schopenhauer didn't believe in completely withdrawing from society. He recognized that even brilliant minds needed some human contact to avoid the darker sides of isolation. The key was being strategic about social engagement, interacting just enough to meet basic human needs without getting pulled into the social games that drain mental energy. This selective approach to socialization remains relevant today. In our hyperconnected world filled with constant notifications, social media pressure, and information overload, knowing how to filter interactions is perhaps more valuable than ever. Intelligence involves not just processing information but knowing which information deserves attention. Instead of seeing their disinterest in others as a problem to fix, Schopenhauer would encourage smart people to view it as a natural boundary that protects their most valuable asset, their mind. After all, appearing uninterested in others can be a burden, but it's also a form of freedom, a way of preserving mental space for more meaningful pursuits. If you've followed along this far, you've probably realized that the connection between intelligence and seeming indifferent to others isn't just a coincidence or a personality quirk. It's a natural outcome of seeing the world differently. Schopenhauer showed us that smart people often find more satisfaction in their inner world than in social chatter, not because they're broken or arrogant, but because typical social interactions rarely offer the depth they crave. The majority of men are so thoroughly small-minded that it is simply amazing that a nature could produce so many ninnies when there are more important things to do, he bluntly observed. But does this mean intelligent people are doomed to feel disconnected from others forever? Not necessarily. The key insight is understanding that this apparent lack of interest isn't something that needs fixing but rather a boundary that needs respecting. Being less invested in others' approval doesn't mean being incapable of connection. It means being selective about where you invest your mental energy. And perhaps this selective approach is actually healthier than desperately seeking validation from everyone you meet. I'm sure you've experienced that peculiar mix of frustration and relief that comes with realizing you don't need to pretend interest in conversations that don't engage your mind. There's something deeply liberating about accepting that it's okay to be selectively social rather than universally available. Intelligence can feel like a wall between you and others sometimes, but it's also a window to perspectives most people never see. I remember once being at a gathering where everyone was discussing a popular reality show, and I couldn't help thinking about how artificial the entire format was and how it reflected broader cultural patterns. When I tried sharing these thoughts, the conversation quickly shifted back to which contestant should win. That's when I realized wanting deeper exchanges isn't arrogance. It's a genuine need for meaningful connection. If you've ever felt this way, you know how isolating it can be to feel like you're speaking a different language, like your mind is exploring the ocean while everyone else is splashing in a puddle. But here's the encouraging part. You don't have to apologize for your depth or pretend to be fascinated by topics that don't stimulate your mind. You have the right to be selective about where you direct your attention. If you found this video helpful, hit like and subscribe for more philosophical content that challenges conventional thinking.